this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. I don't know about y'all, but when I meet somebody for the first time, and after I've engaged in conversation with them for maybe a couple of minutes, one of the things I like to ask is, so where y'all from? And I don't do that as like an insult or anything like that, or a statement of judgment. I genuinely want to know where you're from, because where you're from kind of dictates, maybe your life experience. I'm fascinated how people wind up in certain locations. I've got an odd thing that I do anytime I meet somebody from California. I always ask them, I said, well, was your family like an original Californian or California settler? Because those are kind of rare to come by. I'm always fascinated by that. But one of the questions in forensics that we ask many times is, where are you from? Or where are they from? Referring to them, of course, in my profession, the dead. That question gets even more complex when you're asking that of remains that have been found in a skeletal state. Today, we're going to chat about the skeletal remains of a young lady that was last seen at least 100 miles away. But then she was found in another state, skeletonized. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, I know you're from California, yay?
I am born and raised in Southern California, Joe, but like millions of others, moved away and live elsewhere. And one of the places I have lived is in Gwinnett County, Georgia, in Lawrenceville. Gwinnett County is not in Atlanta. It's outside of Atlanta, Lawrenceville, in that area outside of Atlanta. The reason I'm pointing that out, the story was first reported as 20-year-old Maury Ange Faith Martinez was at the Atlanta courthouse waiting to be picked up by her mother. Her mother was 10 minutes away from the courthouse in Atlanta when Maury Ange Faith Martinez says she has a ride. So somebody she doesn't know, but she's taking a ride with this person. And mom says, okay. That struck me as odd because getting to the courthouse in Atlanta is no small feat. And if you're that close to it, you're not giving up that. No, you don't get in a car with somebody you don't know. I'm almost there. But that's not where Maury Ange Faith Martinez was. She was not in Atlanta at the courthouse. She was at the Gwinnett County courthouse. That makes a difference. Now, for the rest of the story, the geography really does matter here because Maury Ange Faith Martinez was seen at the Gwinnett County courthouse. Her mother had contact with her there. But the minute she gets into a white truck with a man she doesn't know, all contact ceases. Gwinnett County actually had a mall called the Gwinnett Place Mall. It was at one time one of the largest malls in America. But over the years, like millions of other malls, it shrunk down to nothing, and now it's used for television shows like Stranger Things is filmed inside what used to be the Gwinnett Place Mall. But that's Gwinnett County. That's what we're talking about here. That's where this story starts, not in downtown Atlanta. That means something.
Yeah, it does. And it goes to, well, first off, I was talking about geography just a second. She's walking out of this criminal justice complex, which I think is kind of, anytime you hear that term, that means like the courthouse and the jail and maybe police headquarters, depending upon what jurisdiction you're in. This thing is massive, Dave.
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolutely massive. There's a couple of those around in the various counties around Atlanta, and each one of them are large. I don't know if that speaks to the level of crime, because they have to handle, such a volume.
Right.
But anytime I have someone telling me that you have an individual that is standing outside of the jail, the first thing I'm going to think of is, well, why were you there? Were you there for a court appearance?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Were you visiting somebody? Or had you been in residence there, as an inmate?
Right.
And I think those are legitimate questions.
Yep.
It's like, I got to tell you, I've spent a lot of time around courthouses. And over the course of my career, either in the courtroom itself, providing testimony, meeting with DA's office, or, perish the thought. I hated working desks inside jails. I hated it. And that I have had to do.
Okay. Have you done a lot of those? I don't mean to, I'm not chasing a rabbit here, but you have mentioned going into a jail because somebody was dead.
Yeah.
We're not talking about natural causes there. I mean,
no, you can, and that happens.
Really?
I mean, it's like any other kind of population.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you've got a lot of males in there. You have older males.
Yeah.
Generally males that, don't die as a result of some kind of violent event or maybe some kind of drug-addicted event. Once you hit a certain level age-wise and you're unhealthy to begin with, there's a high probability you're going to have a heart attack. I mean, that's just, you're rolling the dice.
Right.
It's number one heart disease is like the number one killer and has been for years.
That's kind of assumed older dudes or older people would end up in the infirmary or something. They wouldn't actually be in the jail cell.
Many times they do, but every now and then you're going to have somebody that has undiagnosed heart ailment and they're found cold and stiff. And now some jails will say, we're not going to leave them in the cell. We're going to take them to the infirmary at this point in time. They're already deceased, Whereas you look at a case like Epstein, where, they thought, I guess, for whatever reason that he might have been salvageable. So you've got EMTs coming into that space, which is always fascinating to me because there's so much crap you have to carry in.
Yeah.
I don't carry in as a death investigator as much as they do, but can you imagine taking a defibrillator? You got to take that gurney. There's a couple of you. And dude, you got to go through security. So there's got these multiple stops along the way.
Even when you're the medical guy and they know you still have to go through security and explain why you need all this stuff. Meanwhile, you got a guy over here struggling to take his last breath.
Yeah.
And hold on. Wait a minute. You got to go back through the wanding area again.
Yeah, no kidding. Here, take your gurney back.
Wow.
And it doesn't happen like that. They have, necessarily, but it is. And I understand it's not necessarily, I was going to use the word absurd. It's not.
Okay.
But yeah, I've spent time, working cases in there. I hate it because you feel, they strip you of everything that you have.
Yeah.
Even my scene bag.
Right.
Lots of times I was only permitted to take certain things, certain metal objects I couldn't have. I'd have to surrender a weapon and my badge.
Yeah.
All that sort of stuff. But with her, you're thinking, why are you at the jail?
Right.
That's the thread you want to pull on this case, because who is generally around courthouses and jails that are on the outside? Well, you got people that are visiting people, you got people that have court appearances, and you have people that have been doing time.
Yeah.
Inside of there, and it's a county jail, so it's not like it's a prison. There's a big difference.
Yep.
But you've got people that are not necessarily at the highlight in their life, you know, and so it's a recipe for disaster. And that was one of the big questions I had when I heard about this poor young woman, thinking, well, why was she there in the first place? And that's something that investigators would look at, Dave. And
that's exactly where you and I started in researching this particular story. She's at the Gwinnett County. Her mom is on her way to pick her up at the Gwinnett County Courthouse. They're on the phone, and Maury Ange Faith Martinez is 20 years old. She is a bit worldly, and she's on the phone with her mother, and she says, I got a guy here that's going to give me a ride, and you don't need to come.
Yikes.
Yeah. She doesn't know this person is going to give her a ride, but indicates to her mother that the guy is with a recovery program. Now, you mentioned a minute ago about the reason somebody might be around a courthouse, waiting from jail or what have you. And in this particular case, at 20 years old, her mother says that that Moriange Faith Martinez had her issues with drugs. Fentanyl in particular is mentioned. And she gets in this white truck to take off to go to wherever. Mom was on her way to pick her up to take her home. Now, she hasn't been living at home with mom for a while. She actually has been on her own, doing her own thing. She is 20 years old. She's not a child, but she's not full-grown, legal 21-year-old and up adult. Last time mom texts or talks to her is in that moment when she gets into the truck with the guy she doesn't know. Mom texts her. Mom gets a bad feeling about it, but never gets another reply. The last thing she knows is that her daughter gets into a vehicle with somebody she doesn't know, ostensibly to take her home. And there you go.
When we consider this journey, and make no mistake, it is a journey, because this young woman did not live with her mother. She actually lived in another jurisdiction, in the town of Alpharetta, which is actually in Fulton County. But yet, she's been at the courthouse in Gwinnett County. As we'll find out, that was only the first stop. We still have 2 more to go.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Brother Dave, I got to tell you, it would be an insult to you to say that we have a problem with fentanyl in this country. Because even though I say it a lot, you've heard it a lot more than everybody else because you're a news guy and you have to wade through. But, in this case, Dave, there's an indication that fentanyl may be involved in this case. There is actually one report out there that she had some struggles with fentanyl addiction, perhaps.
That is of the devil, isn't it? Fentanyl.
Boy, I tell you what, brother.
As we delve into this, I have a couple of questions for you specifically and generally about fentanyl. As a normal person growing up in the United States of America, we have seen our share of drugs that become popular, for brief periods of time. In particular, I think about marijuana and the hippies in the 60s and LSD and things like that.
And crank.
The psychedelics of the 60s and early 70s. And then you end up with cocaine in the mid 70s, late 70s, and through the early 80s, powder cocaine. Then crack. Crack bottomed out, became the base, and it became the drug of choice for many. Heroin has always kind of lingered in the top 5.
Isn't that weird with heroin? It kind of rises and falls. And we can't forget designer drugs either.
Yeah.
Because I got to tell you, I still remember the first case that I ever had, Dave, that involved X.
Yeah.
And I was like, why do you call it X? And that was my first introduction to designer drugs. But, you've heroin and opiates have always been in the background all along. I think about, matter of fact, if you ever watch the old movie, say old, I love this movie, Tombstone. There's a scene in that movie where Powers Booth, and, of course it's a fictionalized version,
right?
Who's in Tombstone. He's actually in an opium den, smoking opium. And so you've had opiates around forever and ever, and they're kind of the spine in addiction that runs through here. And fentanyl is, traditionally it's been an analgesic. There were fentanyl patches.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah.
There's been times with going from cocaine to crack to meth and being the street side of things, people grabbing it. And then you had the other side, which was heroin, and then hillbilly heroin with OxyContin and things like that. And we had all these different things that were horrible and evil and just were massively addictive from a very, very short usage time. And then for some reason, fentanyl shows up during the OxyContin days in terms of being prescribed by doctors. And I remember it being the patch, the fentanyl patch.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
for many of you know that in my private life, I help people find sobriety through recovery. And one of the things we saw back in this time period, we're talking about 2000, early 2000s,
Yeah.
as people were trying to move away from OxyContin, the pill,
Right.
and it was the fentanyl patch that became this, for those suffering heavy duty pain, chronic, put this patch on for a couple of days, whatever. And of course, like anything else, very short order, addicts found out, well, poke holes in it, dip it in, wear a couple of patches at the same time, take a bath, do any number of things to get high. Then it got to, well, if you take the patch, if you separate the patch and you get the film, and oh my gosh, just the things people do. I always think, if these people would use their intellect, creativity, and drive for good, they'd rule the world.
Yeah. You think that, but yet that story, continues.
Yep. Now, how addictive is fentanyl regarded if you compare it to heroin and OxyContin?
Yeah, and the thing about it is that, Dave, here's the problem. It's kind of like crack in the sense that and I was around when crack first burst on the scene.
Addictive from the first hit kind of thing?
Well, yeah, and here's the thing about crack that made crack so attractive, if it can be, is that only rich people snorted coke.
Right.
With crack, you can essentially bake it down, crack off a piece, and a very small amount will just get you blasted. Well, with fentanyl, it doesn't require as much as, say, for instance, like heroin or morphine. I think that, and people say that it's like 100 times more powerful than morphine. So just a couple of tiny little grains of fentanyl can put you on the moon. All right. Wow. And it's very dangerous. You got things that are laced with it out there. But
that's what I was going to ask you about the fentanyl thing with lacing. And that means he's adding fentanyl to other drugs to give it a bigger kick. Now,
yes.
All right. Dealers are not scientists. Okay. They are not they're not wearing a lab coat, and they're actually, they're people you wouldn't trust to balance your checkbook. And you're actually buying drugs from them that they created in their bathroom in the trailer. Okay. And that's why fentanyl was used by the druggies to, so they could water down the whatever drug they were selling and put a little fentanyl to give it a kick.
And the kick is an interesting term. It would give you and gives people this high that is unbelievable. And so once you kind of put that blood in the water, you've created a unique product that is unique to the particular dealer, and people want more of it. It's like, wow, that was incredible.
I got this from Joe Scott Morgan. It's got the devil smiley face on the front. He knows what he's doing. Get it from him. That kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think that it's almost like addiction with the face of a salesman. And so it's one of those types of things. But Dave, our young lady here had been through fentanyl addiction, apparently. Her mother had alluded to this. We've read at least 2 stories now that have alluded to this. Mm-hmm. And you have to think about the sorts of people that it's not like she's running down to the local doc in the box and saying, hey, doc, prescribe me some fentanyl. And again, this goes back to who picked her up at the jail, Dave.
Right.
I want to know. And let me throw one more thing at you if you like that one. She's stunning. I mean, she is physically stunning when you see her. I'd want to know if there was something else running deeper here, because you have this beautiful young woman and you've got somebody out there that maybe is providing her with these drugs that is taking advantage of her. And we're not going to go too far down that road because I don't have any way to validate that. But from an investigative standpoint, you want to ask that question. And with a death investigation, particularly in a case like this, there's not a lot left, when you're doing your examination, particularly in this case. So historically, you have to go back and kind of do a retroactive kind of investigation where you're looking into even her medical records. If she detoxed, you want to subpoena those records and find out, where was she in life? What was her level of dependency? Had she had relapses before. And how long has this been going on? Dave, she was only 20.
Right.
You know, she was not of legal age to purchase alcohol or smokes, but yet she is involved with one of the most insidious substances in modern history. And so you have to ask those questions, when you're conducting an investigation. I think the first place I'd like to know is this person that who was this individual? And they're talking about, this is kind of curious. They've talked about how a white man, as she is standing outside of the jail, is caught on CCTV speaking with her. And then they go on to say, well, this white male shows up in a white truck. So they're able to get clarity, according to reports, that it's the same guy driving the truck. I don't know about you, but when I'm looking in a truck, I can't really, unless I know you, I don't necessarily know who is in the truck. I can't even make out what race you are, what your size is most of the time. Who pays attention to that? But they're saying that they have apparently an image of this. And I find that interesting that still to this point, we don't know who this person is. We don't know where this road leads, Dave.
And here we are. We know she goes missing from this date. To give you some dates, she was reported missing on August 28th by her mom. She actually was last seen August 21st at the courthouse. Okay, that was when she gets in the truck with the guy that she doesn't know. Mom worries from the very beginning. 7 days later, reports are missing. We are dealing with a young woman who is an adult who does not live with her mother. She lives in a different place with a couple of guys. So police are a little bit, I don't know how they approach this in terms of a missing person. If you have a young teenager who goes missing, but they live with you, in your family home, that's different. You report that differently.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep. And that's not the case here because she was on her own living with other people. And so when she was reported missing, police did investigate. They hopped on it, Joe. They didn't blow it off and say, oh, they're not worried, because they actually tracked her from Gwinnett County to an area in Cobb County. And you're going to have to break this down because I don't know Powers Ferry Road, but the police were able to figure out here's where she was really last seen, or that we actually know she was. So they followed her from Gwinnett County to Cobb County in Georgia. And then I'm going to go ahead because we got to get into this. She goes missing. Don't know where she is. We've lost. Boom. It's now going to be a cold case until just outside of Chattanooga, Tennessee, 100 miles to the north, police find something.
In a rural area, they have found her skeletal remains. And, you're talking, it's Hamilton County, which,
Tennessee?
In Tennessee. And it's the same, Chattanooga is actually the county seat. And the geography is kind of interesting up there because if you go in on any of the major arteries, the roadways that go in there, it's notorious. Chattanooga's notorious for getting y'all twisted around because you've got a confluence of various roadways that come in there. I think it's like I-59, I-24, which you would take out of Chattanooga to go to Nashville, for instance. And then you've got one of the largest interstates in the nation, which is 75. And it splits off and breaks back to the northeast. So if you're, if you're heading up north, so you've got this confluence of all of these roadways that are up there. And the fact that she is found, now they're saying found in a rural area in Hamilton County, just because the city of Chattanooga is there doesn't mean that outside of there it's densely populated. It ain't. Because you can get into country really quick up there. And, you think about this. Well, how did she get from Gwinnett County, which is on the far east side, northeast of Atlanta, all the way, and you've got this phone pinging as it is moving. I'm saying it is moving, not she is moving, Dave. And we've learned this lesson in the past. It is moving up 75 at this point in time. Well, who goes to Chattanooga? And who would know? I think one of the big questions is who would feel comfortable enough seeking out a rural area to deposit a 20-year-old's body.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn sensational.
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
I love Tennessee. I love going up there. I've been going there since I was 8 or 9. But when you consider that up in Hamilton County, you've got a young woman whose remains are found in a rural location, one of the first questions I'm going to ask is, well, what was the status of the death scene? Or that's not an appropriate comment, I don't think, because, or an accurate comment, because if you say death scene, that implies that the death occurred there. I guess the proper term would be, what was the deposition site like? Because, Dave, from what we understand, this site contains skeletal remains.
I was going to say, Joe, now, I understand what you're saying about the death scene and not knowing, because all they found from August 2023, we're talking about the first week of January. We're not talking a long period of time, Joe, for a 20-year-old woman to go from standing outside the courthouse to skeletonized remains. And they're found outside Chattanooga in a rural area. And we don't know how they were found in terms of were they just piled up on top of one another? Did somebody build a sign out of them and make, what was going on? We don't know. But I got some questions, Joe. How fast does a human body become skeletonized remains, even if the body is laid outside to the elements?
Yeah, and it's as I always say, my default position with this is it is environmentally dependent. You have what's referred to as a surface deposition, which is where you take a body and you essentially lay it on the ground. And just think of you hear this term a lot in our line of work. You hear this term, a body dump. And that means that a body dump implies that somebody was moving quickly. They had a location where they're just going to take, and this happens. Hey, man, look, I've worked cases where I've had to go and I've found skeletal remains or remnants of skeletal remains in ditches. So what that tells me as an investigator, somebody rolls up along the road, ditches run alongside roads, they open the door and they essentially just pull maybe an entire human body intact, dump it in the ditch. Well, that body, just by virtue of what we know about ditches, their purpose is to drain water, right? So the environment in that particular location is going to be dictated by heavy rain. That's one of the reasons we didn't find all of the elements of the skeleton in that particular case, because they've got a long way that they can just be washed to. And you're not always going to see it, because then you've got scavenger activity that's going to come up. For a while, that body would remain intact. But when you talk about, if it sounds like there's not a lot of excavation going on here. This sounds like a surface deposition of the body, which implies to me the person didn't take time with the body. It was viewed to them or by them as an inconvenience.
Oh, okay.
Or they're trying to get as much distance between them. Now, I will go ahead and make this big reveal. And this happens, unfortunately, a lot in skeletal remains, Dave, as in our case here. They can't come up with a cause of death. They can't. And the biggest, generally one of the biggest problems that you have in a case like this, where you can't determine cause of death and you've got skeletal remains, is there's no soft tissue. So you can't make a diagnosis that's based on hemorrhage. Now, you can look at the body, the skeletal remains, and say, well, I've got fractures here, but are those fractures as a result of antemortem trauma, or is it a postmortem event where bone snap as they go through decay. I can't imagine that would be the case here because she had not been down that long, but it was sufficient enough for skeletonization to begin. Mm-hmm. And it can, I've seen bodies go pretty quickly in particularly humid environments where there's a lot of heat.
Then this area is very humid.
Yeah, it is. And you're also putting in the element of scavenger activity. Mm-hmm. You've got coyotes. Coyotes are everywhere around this area of the South. We have them here. I've seen them in my yard. They certainly have them up in Tennessee as well. You've got wild hogs that we have a major problem with in the South. I can't speak to Hamilton County that much, but I do know that they're out there and they will root on a body. And then you've got smaller animals. You got wild dogs too. So if any of that was introduced into the equation, that's another factor that has to be considered. And if you have skeletal remains and you do have animal activity, and look, I'm going to be very blunt. This body bags, you're talking about postmortem feasting on bodies. And so there would be evidence of that on bone as well. And you have to be able to tell the difference between, again, postmortem trauma on the body as opposed to what happened in life that brought about her death. She's 20 years old, Dave. She should not be dead. So that leads us down a very sinister path, doesn't it?
And that's where, could you tell from the bones if she ingested drugs prior to death, fentanyl specifically? Could we find out from the bones?
Not simply based on bone itself.
It's not in the marrow.
No, it's not. And here's the problem. They have really released so very little information.
Right.
That we don't really have a source of data as far as soft tissue that may have remained.
Okay, let me ask you this, Joe, as long as we're there, because we don't know, but your background, you've done, every time we do the show, I find out something different that you have done. And I love that. But it also makes me think, when you close your eyes sometimes, do you just immediately have a shocker like poking you in the side, a flash memory? I'll have a flash memory of growing up and something happening. I just can't imagine what your flash memories do. But
no, I mean, and it used to be a lot more frequent with diagnosis of PTSD, and I went through a lot of therapy for that. But every now and then, I'll slip back into that state. There will be something that will kick something off in my brain. I'm past nightmares at this point in my life, so fortunately, by the grace of God, I don't have to endure that anymore. I had really bad ones, but every now and then, you'll come across a case that acts as a triggering mechanism because you go back and recall things. But and but look, and as morbid as this is, and everything's on the table here, I got to reveal this. I actually enjoyed the recovery of skeletal remains. I found it was actually kind of peaceful because you're focused on, if you're doing a skeletal recovery, it's labor intensive work. I didn't have to do anything else when I was out there. Any other cases I might catch or that might come my way is something that would be back burner. Somebody else would handle it. I'm trying to assist a forensic anthropologist at the scene for the recovery. And it was always fascinating to me. It's like, I don't know, to me, it was kind of like putting a gigantic puzzle together. And so it would occupy my mind. And you never know when you're combing over an area what's going to be revealed. And in a case like this, where, pretty quickly, particularly if you have the skull, you can get an idea many times about the age of the individual. You can, because a couple of things that we look for, we do aging, or the forensic anthropologists do aging on skulls, what brackets, and it's generally very broadly bracketed. You do racing, which is you determine what race an individual is from, their point of origin. And forensic anthropologists have a way to just eyeball remains and can ballpark it. Sometimes they're wrong. You can look for trauma assessment. And an interesting other thing, you can look for stature, which is kind of fascinating. And when we know that our young lady was just over 5 feet tall, and Dave, she only weighed 100 pounds. So there's, she's very petite, 100 pounds. I don't know. I think maybe I weighed 100 pounds when I was 5. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I'm a big guy. Maybe that's the case. But when you think about, she's very diminutive, and would be easily handled by somebody, maybe an individual in a truck that picked her up. But why? What would cause? What would bring about her death? From that jail in Gwinnett County, 100 miles away, to the point where they've crossed the state line. I got to tell you, man, one of the things that pops to mind with me, one of the things that comes up first is something we've already mentioned, fentanyl. And the fact that she's found in a rural area. If she's in a rural area, either somebody, because their purpose, they're going up 75. 75 winds up in one spot. All right. Winds up in Chattanooga. What if she's in the vehicle and fentanyl is involved? She's been out of jail now. She had gone through detox. Did you know this? This is kind of sinister. But once you detox and you attempt to do the same amount of drugs that you've done prior to detoxing, it's lethal, man. So it would only take a very small amount. I'm not saying that's what happened, but the investigators have to think about that, I would think.
Now, Joe, we've got bones. Skeletonized. That's what we're skeletonized remains. Now, does that mean that there is no flesh on the bones, or is this just a general term that is used to explain to the public that they did recover somebody, but not identifiable?
I think that is a very insightful question, because in our field, we will use the term completely skeletonized and partially skeletonized. Or we will say, here's the other qualifier, we'll say we have an intact remain. And intact means that it doesn't mean that the body hasn't decomposed. All right. That's not what's being implied here. But what it's saying is that there are no visible bony structures. Like when you eyeball a body, you don't have one of the most prominent areas that you look at is like the forehead, for instance. Has any of that skin, the integrity of that skin, been compromised to the point and it kind of peels back like this, particularly as the skin becomes dried out or desiccated? You'll see little tears in the skin. You'll have bone that is visible, maybe the external table of the skull. All they're saying is skeletal remains, and they're in a rural area. So I have to take them on face value. I would think that there would have to be something left. And here's one other thing. I'd want to know what the status of clothing is. That's a big, if you just have skeletal remain, okay, that's a big difference than actually finding skeletal remains still contained in clothing, because that goes to antemortem or prior death activity. Were they naked? And I'm saying that in general. I'm asking that question, or did somebody strip the clothes off of the body just after they died? Because, being absent of clothing implies a lot of things, man. It implies that maybe they were deprived and set loose in the wilderness. It also implies that if they're without clothing, that maybe there was evidence on the clothing. It also applies something more sinister too, and that's sexual activity. Was this a rape homicide? And I think that's one of the things they're thinking about, Dave.
What about without tool marks on the actual bones? Is there a way to determine that this body was placed in this rural area? Again, we know she left the Gwinnett County Courthouse on August 21st. We know that they saw her, they being the police. They have proof she was in Cobb County, Georgia. And then we find her skeletonized remains 100 miles from there in a rural area outside Chattanooga. And assuming she died. Well, no, I can't even assume that. I don't know where she died. I don't know how she died. I don't know when she died. We don't know anything. We don't know if her body. We don't know if her remains were found laid out in bones, just thrown out of a car, or if she had been taken apart manually, deconstructed, and bones piled there.
Right.
We don't know.
That's key. And, you brought up, that's one of the questions that's always asked when you have skeletal remains. What's the status of it? And this is how we're going to break it down. Because bones will still have, sometimes skeletal remains will still remain articulated, which means intact. The soft tissue has come off, but yet the bones are still attached together by various attachments that structurally. Now, if you've got a set of skeletal remains, Dave, where the body where the remains are stacked, like you were saying, boy, that's a gruesome thought, because that gives you an indication that the body had been rendered down in some manner, and then the bones stacked, and that's almost a ritualized thing.
Right.
I don't think we have that going on here.
They would have said it. They would have said something.
Yeah, I think that they would have. And here's one other thing that I think that they're working with here, Dave, because if it can be shown that this is a kidnapping, or that this may have happened, guess who they've involved at this point in time? Who the perpetrator is involved in this point in time? Because they've left Georgia. They've crossed state lines at this point in time.
Involved.
Yeah, the FBI is going to be up to their eyeballs in this case. So they're going to bring in all of the resources that they have there. But one of the greatest resources for investigation when it comes to skeletal remains is, I don't know, just over 100 miles to the east of Chattanooga in the great state of Tennessee, and that's UT Body Farm.
Wow.
So that's one thing about Tennessee when it comes to Dr. Bass, who founded the Body Farm. He always made himself available to law enforcement. I would not have wanted to be one of his students because he's very difficult professor to have. However, he always made time for law enforcement, and that, I think that's been passed on through the lineage there. They have that organization at their disposal. Right now, all we know is that we have no cause of death. This young woman walks out of a courthouse, and there are very few electronic breadcrumbs to give us an idea of movement other than that ping, that last ping that they have of her or her phone traveling northbound on I-75 toward Hamilton County, Tennessee. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.